drinking ages weren't uniform across the country. Some states still allowed 18 or 19-year-olds to order a beer in the early 80s. Bars near state borders became teenage destinations, cars packed with kids chasing a legal drink. Today it sounds reckless, but back then it was seen as normal, just another local quirk of geography and law. Boys will be boys was the excuse for office talk that would spark HR investigations now. Off-color jokes, pin-up calendars in break rooms, and casual remarks passed without much pushback. It was the workplace culture, brushed off as harmless fun. Today, it would mean complaints, meetings, and firings. But in the 80s, it was background noise. Some states allowed open containers in cars, and people barely blinked. A beer in the cup holder while cruising on a back road wasn't scandalous. It was common. Highway patrol might issue a warning, but no one thought of it as shocking. Looking back, the risks seem obvious, but at the time, it was everyday life. 4th of July meant neighborhood fireworks, every driveway a launch pad. Families bought Roman candles, bottle rockets, and firecrackers from roadside stands, no permit in sight. The pops and bangs carried late into the night. Burns and close calls happened, but it was part of the holiday. Today, most towns ban it outright, but back then it was expected. Airport security was little more than a glance. Shoes stayed on, belts stayed buckled, and nobody checked your ID for domestic flights. Families walked right to the gate, hugging relatives as they boarded. Metal detectors were there, but the process was quick and relaxed. It's almost unthinkable now, but flying back then felt casual and welcoming. The idea of a designated driver hadn't fully caught on. After a night out, someone would shrug, say, "I'm fine," and drive. Friends piled in, trusting instincts instead of breathalyzers. It wasn't seen as shocking, just the way things were. The tragedies added up, but culturally it was brushed off until stricter laws forced change. In the 1980s, neighbors acted like co-parents. A kid caught misbehaving down the block might get scolded by Mrs. Johnson, who'd then promise to tell your mother. Parents backed each other up, no questions asked. Children learned quickly that the entire street was watching. It built community, though today many would call it overstepping. Smoking sections were carved out of restaurants, airports, even hospital lobbies. Sometimes just a painted line on the floor, as if smoke respected boundaries. Non-smokers sat nearby, breathing the same haze, and nobody questioned it. Lighting up at a desk or table was routine, socially accepted everywhere. It wasn't strange then. It was simply part of life. Neighborhood mosquito trucks rolled slowly through summer evenings, fogging chemicals into the air. Kids on bikes actually pedaled into the mist, laughing as clouds drifted across lawns. Parents barely raised an eyebrow. It looked like harmless smoke, not poison. Today, the thought of children playing in pesticide spray sounds insane, but back then it was just another summer memory. Bowling alleys reeked of cigarette smoke, jukeboxes rattled windows, and kids played Pac-Man near the snack bar. Families bowled side by side with leagues, neon beer signs glowed, and laughter carried through the haze. Today, Smoke-free rules and cleaner air changed the vibe. But back then, alleys were smoky, loud, and part of weekly fun. In the 1980s, Latchkey kids were a fixture of suburban life. Parents both worked, so kids carried house keys on shoelaces or chains and let themselves in after school. They'd heat up a microwave dinner, watch cartoons, and stay alone for hours. Nobody thought it unusual. It was just how millions of middle-class families made life work. Tanning beds and suntan accelerator oils were all the rage. People roasted in strip mall salons or slathered baby oil on lawns chasing a deep bronze glow. Sunburns weren't warnings. They were badges of summer. Peeling skin and aloe vera were part of this cycle. Today, doctors cringe at the thought, but back then it was beauty and health rolled together. Lawn darts, jarts they called them, were sold right in the toy aisle, heavy metal spikes flung skyward and thudding into the ground just feet from kids. Every neighborhood had a set. Every barbecue included a match. The injuries piled up, but at the time it was treated as harmless fun. Today, they're banned for good reason. Halloween in the 1980s stretched for miles. Kids roamed neighborhoods after dark, pillowcases filling with candy, and strangers handed out popcorn balls or homemade fudge without suspicion. No parents with flashlights trailing behind, no trunk or treat alternatives. It was freedom wrapped in costumes, the kind of night that felt endless and safe, though today it would raise eyebrows. Company holiday parties in the 80s were wild affairs. Open bars flowed freely, employees drank hard, and rides home weren't planned. Carpools or simply driving after a few was standard. HR wasn't hovering, and lawsuits weren't in the back of everyone's mind. It was cheer, loosened ties, and plenty of stories. Today, the liability alone makes it unthinkable. Pilots used to invite kids into the cockpit mid-flight. Wide-eyed children climbed into the front, touching buttons and snapping Polaroids with smiling captains. Flight attendants encouraged it. Parents cheered, and nobody saw danger in it. For a child, it was a magical glimpse of the skies. Today, cockpit doors are locked tight from start to finish. Getting lost meant stopping at a gas station. Attendants leaned on counters, wiping hands with rags, giving directions with landmarks instead of street names. Turn left at the Red Barn, go past the diner. Nobody had GPS, and nobody panicked if they wandered a few miles out of the way. It was simply how travel worked. Teachers in the 1980s often smoked in faculty lounges. The haze drifted down hallways, clinging to sweaters and notebooks. It was just part of school life, as normal as chalk dust and squeaky floors. Students knew when teachers had been on break, not from the clock, but from the cloud of cigarette smell that followed them back. Arcades were unsupervised hangouts. Rows of machines glowing through haze. Smoke filled the air. Older teens lingered, and kids lined up with pockets of quarters. Parents dropped children off, trusting they'd stay safe. No one checked your ID or worried much about who else was inside. It was the social hub of youth. Today, the idea sounds reckless, but it worked then. Shop class let teenagers run serious equipment. Table saws, drill presses, welding torches. Safety goggles were optional, Supervision was loose, and scars were seen as lessons learned. Projects ranged from birdhouses to engine parts, all under the hum of dangerous machinery. It was considered education, preparing students for trades, though today the liability alone would be unthinkable. Peanut butter sandwiches filled lunchboxes across America. Allergy tables didn't exist, and nobody asked about cross-contamination. School cafeterias smelled of peanut butter and jelly, and kids swapped halves without a thought. Severe peanut allergies were rare or unrecognized, so there was little concern. The idea of banning peanut products from schools would have seemed unnecessary, almost unimaginable in that era. Riding in the back of a pickup truck felt like the height of freedom. Kids sat on the wheel wells or sprawled flat, hair whipping in the wind as the truck rattled down highways. Gravel stung, bugs smacked, but nobody complained. It wasn't hidden or frowned upon. It was ordinary. Now, it would be cause for a citation. Classroom potlucks meant trays of homemade cupcakes, cookies, and casseroles brought by parents and piled high. No ingredient lists, no allergy warnings, no restrictions. Teachers welcomed it, kids devoured it, and nobody questioned whether it was safe. The risks were invisible then, and the trust was automatic. It was community food, shared freely, without today's caution. Playground equipment was built for thrills, not safety. Monkey bars towered over asphalt, slides were metal and sizzling hot in summer, and teeter-totters slammed down hard. Skinned knees, bruises, and broken bones were seen as part of childhood. The idea of padded ground and safety standards hadn't taken hold yet. Playgrounds were rough, and kids loved them. Baby walkers with wheels were everywhere, sold by the pallet at department stores. Babies zoomed across kitchens, rolling toward stairs or sharp corners before anyone reacted. They tipped, trapped, and caused countless injuries. But they were seen as normal baby gear. Safety warnings and bans came later. Back then, they were as common as rattles or bottles. Parents often drove with infants perched on their laps. A baby bouncing on Dad's knee while steering slowly through a parking lot wasn't unusual. Car seats were recommended, but not enforced like today. Photos from the era show smiling babies in front seats, completely unrestrained. It was seen as sweet, not reckless, though today it's shocking. A pocket knife in the backpack wasn't scandalous. Boys carried them for sharpening pencils, whittling sticks, or cutting fishing line. Courthouses even had trays for people to drop them in before entering. School lockers sometimes held them too without lockdowns or panic. It was just another tool, as ordinary as a ruler, though today it would trigger alarms. Riding on bike handlebars or doubling up on one seat was standard practice. Balance was the only rule, and scraped knees were the only penalty. Friends pedaled each other down streets, laughing, swerving, sometimes crashing. No helmets, no safety lectures, just a sense of fun and freedom. To see it today would make adults wince, but nobody thought twice then. Parents laid babies on their stomachs to sleep because that was the advice of the day. Cribs filled with blankets and pillows looked cozy, not dangerous. SIDS wasn't fully understood, and the Back to Sleep campaign hadn't begun. It was ordinary parenting in the 80s, but today it's seen as risky and strongly warned against. Cigarette vending machines stood in restaurants, bowling alleys, even hotel lobbies. A couple of quarters and a pull of the knob dropped a pack, no questions asked. Kids could reach them just as easily as adults. Nobody carded, and nobody worried. Now it would be shocking, but in the 80s, it was just another machine in the corner. Hitchhiking was still common. A thumb stuck out on the side of the road often brought a stranger's car to a stop. College kids, travelers, and even teenagers tried it, seeing it as a cheap way to get around. No apps, no background checks, just trust. Today, it sounds like a crime waiting to happen, but it was ordinary then. Little league coaches sometimes chewed tobacco right in the dugout. They'd spit into cans between pitches, calling out encouragement with brown stains on their teeth. Parents looked on, unbothered. Nobody thought about the example it set. It was just baseball. Today, it would draw outrage and rule books, but then it was as much a part of the game as peanuts and Cracker Jack. Leaded gasoline lingered at pumps well into the 80s. The smell clung to stations, and the signs didn't raise alarms. Filling up with leaded or unleaded was just a choice at the nozzle. Few knew the health risks. It was simply fuel. Today, it's unthinkable, but back then it was part of every gas stop across the country. Asbestos was everywhere. Ceiling tiles, pipe wraps, and insulation in schools and public buildings. Nobody gave it a second thought. Kids studied under it. Teachers taught beside it. Janitors worked around it. The danger wasn't fully recognized yet, and the word hazard rarely crossed anyone's lips. Now it sends in hazmat teams. But in the 80s, it was background material. Used motor oil was often poured down storm drains or along fence lines to kill weeds. It was seen as practical, not polluting. A jug emptied in the gutter wasn't reported. It was routine. Nobody imagined the environmental cost. Now, it would spark fines and outrage, but in the 80s, it was just another household chore. Burning leaves in the gutter was a fall ritual. Families raked piles, struck a match, and let smoke drift down the street. Neighbors chatted while the smell filled the air. It was as much a season marker as pumpkins or football. Today, ordinances and air quality laws forbid it. But back then, the smoke felt like autumn itself. Recycling bins weren't part of the landscape yet. Glass bottles, tin cans, and newspapers all went straight into trash bags. Landfills filled with material now considered salvageable. Nobody thought twice about it. Recycling was a niche idea, not mainstream practice. Today, households separate plastics, papers, and compost, but in the 80s, everything went into the same black bag. Car owners vented Freon when fixing their air conditioners, letting the gas hiss into the air. It was just part of backyard mechanics. No special equipment, no disposal rules. People topped off refrigerant themselves with little kits. The ozone damage wasn't top of mind. Today, such a practice is banned worldwide, but back then it was just do-it-yourself maintenance. Drive-thru liquor stores thrived, letting drivers pick up six-packs, bottles, and mixers without leaving the car. Some looked like banks, with attendants handing booze through windows. It was efficient, casual, and common. Today, the concept feels reckless, but in the 80s, it was seen as a convenience. One more errand done without unbuckling the seatbelt. Paint strippers made with methylene chloride were common in garages. Homeowners used them to strip furniture or cabinets, often in closed spaces with no masks. The fumes were strong, but nobody worried about safety. Hardware store shelves were full of it. Today, it's tightly regulated and recognized as dangerous, but in the 80s, it was considered a standard tool. Candy cigarettes and bubblegum cigars lined the shelves at kid eye level. They looked just like the real thing, with powdered sugar smoke or shiny wrappers. Children bought them without irony, puffing in imitation of adults. Parents barely noticed. Today, they'd be condemned as marketing tobacco to kids, but back then they were cheap and fun candy. Mercury thermometers were in every medicine cabinet. When one snapped, silver beads rolled across the floor, often touched or even toyed with. Some kids held them in their mouths under the tongue without worry. It was ordinary, a trusted tool. Today, the hazards are taken seriously. But in the 80s, mercury was treated like a harmless household substance. Chemistry sets and toy aisles came with real chemicals, sulfur, nitrates, alcohol burners. Kids mixed compounds and lit experiments in basements and garages. It was pitched as educational fun, sparking curiosity without much thought to danger. Accidents happened, but it was considered part of the learning. Today, safety labels would choke such a product, but back then it was normal. Bikes, skateboards, and roller skates rarely came with helmets or pads. Skinned elbows, chipped teeth, and broken bones were rites of passage. Parents offered iodine and Band-Aids, not helmets. Kids zipped through neighborhoods, fearless and unprotected. Protective gear was for professionals, not everyday play. Today's safety-conscious world makes it hard to imagine just how casual it once was. Riding in the way back of the station wagon felt like freedom. Kids sprawled on sleeping bags facing traffic out the rear window, trading snacks and games. No seatbelts, no worries, just windshields stacked with bug splatter and hours of highway rolling past. It was normal family travel, even if today it would earn a ticket in minutes. BB guns and pellet rifles often arrived as birthday presents. The only safety talk might be, "Don't shoot your eye out." Kids treated them like toys, plinking cans, bottles, and sometimes each other. Parents watched casually or not at all. Today, the idea of handing a child a gun-shaped gift is unthinkable, but in the 80s, it was expected. Pickup trucks often had gun racks mounted in the rear windows, rifles displayed openly. They weren't locked, just visible behind the glass. Even in school parking lots in rural areas, nobody panicked. It was part of the culture, part of life. Today, it would cause lockdowns and headlines, but then it was barely noticed. Schools had open doors, no buzzers, no badges, no lines at metal detectors. Parents walked in without question, and kids wandered halls freely. Security guards weren't standard. Shootings weren't yet part of the national conversation. The idea of locked campuses and constant surveillance wasn't there. Today, it's unimaginable. But back then, school felt wide open and safe. Kids biked to 7-Eleven for Slurpees, sometimes spending hours hanging out in the parking lot. Nobody worried much about strangers or dangers. Clerks tolerated the loitering, and parents didn't demand constant check-ins. It was independence for $1 and a straw. Today, it would raise alarms, but in the 80s, it was just neighborhood life. School buses often dropped kids blocks away from home, expecting them to walk the rest. Children wandered quiet streets, sometimes alone, without cell phones or supervision. Nobody considered it neglect. It was simply routine. Today, parents would worry. But in the 80s, the walk home was seen as part of growing up, not a danger. Parents smoked in the car with the windows rolled up, kids strapped in or not, breathing it all. Ashes flicked out the window, smoke hanging thick in the cabin. It was considered normal, even comforting. Nobody questioned it. Nobody raised alarms. Today, laws forbid it in many places. But in the 80s, it was just another car ride. House doors, even car doors, were often left unlocked. Keys hid under mats or sat on top of tires, ready for anyone who needed them. Neighbors borrowed sugar or tools without knocking. Crime existed, but the mindset was trust first, worry second. Today, alarms, cameras, and deadbolts rule. But back then, it was about community confidence. Backyard trampolines were a free-for-all. No nets, no pads, no rules, just kids flipping, double bouncing, and colliding until somebody limped off. Parents watched from lawn chairs, if at all. The risks were obvious, but the fun outweighed them. Today, liability and lawsuits hover over such setups. But in the 80s, it was just another summer afternoon. Free matchbooks sat in bowls at restaurants, hotels, even banks. They advertised the name of the place, a little keepsake that fit in every pocket. People collected them casually, pockets smelling faintly of sulfur and paper. Even non-smokers grabbed them for convenience. Today, they've all but disappeared, relics of a time when fire fit in every pocket. Business lunches stretched long in the 80s. A couple of martinis, maybe a steak, and deals closed with nothing more than a handshake. Expense accounts carried the day, and the idea of heading back to the office tipsy wasn't shocking. Today, it'd raise eyebrows and liability questions, but back then, it was just how business got done. Credit card carbons piled up in drawers. Each purchase made a clunky sound on the machine, spitting out triplicate slips with names and numbers printed clear as day. Clerks tossed them casually, and sometimes families saved them. Identity theft wasn't on the radar. Today, such exposure would spark panic, but then it was simply paperwork. Writing Social Security numbers on checks, school forms, even rental applications was routine. Nobody thought twice about it. Those 9 digits were just another identifier. Employers and banks often asked for it directly, and people obliged. Identity theft wasn't yet a household phrase. Today, that practice would be reckless. But in the 80s, it was considered perfectly normal. Hotel pools had no lifeguards, just a sign reminding guests to swim at your own risk. Kids cannonballed, dove, and roughhoused, while parents lounged on deck chairs with drinks. No wristbands, no waivers, no hourly checks. It was freedom with risk baked in. Today, regulations would clamp down hard, but back then, it was summer fun. Dinner hour was prime time for telemarketers. Phones rang, interrupting meatloaf and mashed potatoes with offers for aluminum siding, magazine subscriptions, or vacation deals. No do not call lists existed, and the calls seemed endless. Some folks slammed phones down, others listened politely. Today, protections keep most of those dinner-time interruptions away, but back then, it was nightly life. 900-number hotlines filled late-night TV. Psychics promised to read futures. Sports gurus gave betting picks, and chat lines targeted lonely teens. The calls were expensive, charged by the minute, and often scolded once the bill arrived. Parents fumed, kids shrugged, and companies raked in money. Today it would be a scandal, but in the 80s it was entertainment. Magazine subscription cards tumbled out of every issue, prepaid and ready for the mail. Coffee tables scattered with them. Kids scribbled names and addresses as jokes, and sometimes extras ended up in the mailbox. Everything was mail in, no online clicks. Today it feels archaic, but back then it was simply how you signed up for reading material. Kids could order things straight from TV commercials using the family phone and a credit card. Whether it was toy cars, workout tapes, or novelty gadgets, it was just a phone call away. Operators stood by, no parental locks, just faith that kids wouldn't dial. Today, apps guard purchases tightly, but back then it was open-season shopping. Video stores displayed R-rated movie covers at kid eye level. Horror flicks with bloodied faces and lurid titles sat next to comedies and cartoons. No curtain, no family-safe section, just rows of everything. Kids walked past it all without shielding, sometimes sneaking peeks. Today, it'd draw outrage. But in the 80s, it was just part of renting a movie. Toy lines often tied into violent movies. RoboCop, Aliens, even Rambo got figures aimed squarely at grade schoolers. The films were rated R, but the merchandise filled toy aisles. Kids staged battles with characters parents hadn't even let them watch on screen. Today, the cross-marketing would be controversial, but back then it was shrugged off as clever branding. Saturday morning cartoons were practically commercials in disguise. Half-hour shows existed to sell action figures, dolls, or vehicles. From He-Man to G.I. Joe, the toy line came first, the cartoon second. Kids loved it, parents tolerated it, and companies cashed in. Today, rules are stricter, but back then it was just how cartoons worked. Bright colors and buyable heroes. Tobacco ads filled highways and magazines. Joe Camel smirked from billboards. Marlboro men towered above traffic, and glossy spreads glamorized smoking. Nobody thought much of it. It was simply part of the landscape. Kids saw it daily. Adults ignored it. Today, the idea of cartoon camels marketing cigarettes is unthinkable. Beer and liquor logos plastered sports broadcasts. From NASCAR walls to ballpark outfields, alcohol branding was everywhere. Budweiser frogs and neon beer signs were practically mascots. No disclaimers, no restrictions. Fans cheered alongside the ads, and kids absorbed it by osmosis. Today, tighter controls keep that in check. But back then, drinking and sports walked hand in hand. Menus had no calorie counts, no breakdowns, and no warnings. Eating light meant ordering a tab soda or cottage cheese plate. Grapefruit diets and slim fast shakes were the craze. Diners and chains didn't calculate health. They served food, and people ate without second thoughts. Today, calories stare from every board. But in the 80s, it was blissful ignorance. Classroom film strips often showed nuclear war simulations and civil defense drills. Kids watched mushroom clouds and fallout shelters, real nightmares presented as education. Teachers rolled with it. Students sat wide-eyed. The Cold War hovered everywhere. Today, showing such material would raise alarms. But in the 80s, it was routine. Fear packaged as preparedness. Civil defense sirens were tested regularly, echoing across towns. Fallout shelter signs still marked buildings, relics of earlier decades but still fresh in memory. Kids heard the wail without panic. It was just part of the landscape. Today, those signs look like museum pieces, but back then, they were a reminder of a world always on edge. Some schools still had rifle teams, complete with indoor ranges. Students carried cased rifles onto buses, stored them in lockers, and shot at targets after class. It was treated as a sport. No panic, no lockdown drills. Today, the image sounds impossible. But in the 80s, it was just another extracurricular, like basketball or band. Police high-speed chases often played out live on TV. Policies for backing off were loose, and suspects tore through neighborhoods with cruisers close behind. News helicopters beamed it all into living rooms. Viewers watched like it was entertainment. Today, tactics are different, but back then, danger and drama rolled unfiltered across the screen. DUI checkpoints were far fewer. Getting waved through after a couple was common, and laws weren't as strict. People often rationalized driving after drinking, and enforcement lagged behind. Today, stricter penalties and ride shares changed the landscape. But in the 80s, leniency and casual attitudes kept drunk, driving more accepted than anyone would tolerate now. Buying a rifle or shotgun often required little more than cash in hand. Background checks weren't widespread, and paperwork was minimal. Sporting goods stores and even some hardware shops sold firearms routinely. It was ordinary shopping, no controversy. Today, it would be headline news. But in the 80s, it was considered a standard purchase. Trips meant folding paper maps across the dashboard or flipping through an AAA triptych with hand-marked routes. Passengers traced highways with fingers, arguments broke out over missed turns, and gas station clerks gave directions when things went wrong. No GPS voice nagged or recalculated, just you, the road, and sometimes a stubborn debate about which exit to take. Collect calls were a lifeline from payphones. Kids would say, "Mom, pick me up at 7," before hanging up to dodge the charge. Parents knew the code, and everyone saved a quarter. Operators caught on, but it worked often enough. Today, unlimited cell plans keep people connected non-stop. But back then, quick tricks like that made communication affordable. Corporal punishment remained legal in many districts. A wooden paddle might hang in the principal's office, more than just decoration. Parents rarely protested. They often approved. Misbehavior could mean a stinging reminder in front of classmates. It's unimaginable today, but back then discipline at school was sometimes swift, physical, and considered an extension of parenting. No caller ID meant every ring was a mystery. Friends pulled pranks. Is your refrigerator running? And kids howled with laughter. Telemarketers slipped through too, but it was part of daily life. You answered not knowing if it was grandma or a stranger. Today, names and numbers appear instantly, but the element of surprise is long gone. Drop-side cribs were standard, designed so parents could lower one side to reach the baby. They seemed practical, even modern, but over time the hazards became clear. Injuries and accidents piled up, and recalls came decades later. At the time, though, they were considered safe and convenient. Another example of how norms have shifted. Phone books listed nearly every name, address, and landline in town. A fat directory thudded onto porches yearly, free of charge. Kids used them for prank calls, parents for lost contacts, and even businesses advertised in the yellow pages. Today, such open access would feel dangerous. But in the 80s, it was simply public information. Schools handed out printed directories with every student's home address and phone number. Parents swapped carpools easily, and classmates called without hesitation. Privacy wasn't a major concern. It was convenience. Today, giving out such information would raise alarms. But back then, it built networks of neighbors, carpools, and playdates with a single stapled booklet. Film labs developed every roll of film, from vacation snapshots to private moments. Clerks saw it all, and sometimes funny stories slipped through about photos that shouldn't have been taken. People trusted strangers with their memories, never questioning who peeked. Today, everything's digital and private, but back then every print passed through someone else's hands. School darkrooms taught kids photography with real chemicals, developer trays, enlargers, and tongs. Fumes filled the air, ventilation was questionable, and gloves were rarely provided. Students leaned over trays to watch images appear like magic. Safety wasn't top of mind. Today, rules would choke the process, but back then, it was considered hands-on learning. Lunchboxes were metal, with sharp corners and heavy latches. Kids proudly carried ones decorated with Star Wars, E.T., or superheroes, banging them on tables and sometimes against each other. Eventually, safety concerns phased them out for plastic. Today, those same boxes are collectibles. But in the 80s, they were daily gear for sandwiches and juice. Car interiors smelled of hot vinyl, foam seats, and cigarette smoke baked in by the sun. Seatbelts got too hot to touch, dashboards cracked, and windows cranked down by hand. That was the new car smell people lived with, plastic and smoke. Today's climate-controlled, leather-scented rides make it seem impossible. But back then, it was normal. Parents let kids steer in parking lots, perched on laps with tiny hands on the wheel. Giggles filled the car, and it felt like freedom. No thought of danger, just practice for someday. Today, liability would end the fun before it began. But in the 80s, it was an innocent thrill shared between parent and child. Motel stays often packed whole families into one room. Kids sprawled on floors, air mattresses hissed flat by morning, and siblings argued over who got the bed. Fire codes weren't enforced the way they are now, and nobody blinked. Today, it sounds like a hazard, but back then it was affordable family travel, plain and simple. Beaches filled with glass bottles, coolers of beer, and music blaring from boomboxes. Patrols were rare and rules were few. Broken bottles cut feet, but it didn't stop the parties. Today, bands and patrols keep things cleaner. But back then, the sand sparkled with shards, and summers carried fewer restrictions on a good time. Fireworks tents popped up roadside, often selling to teenagers with nothing more than a nod. Sparklers, firecrackers, and bottle rockets went home in paper bags. No IDS, no safety lectures, just sales. Today, laws and safety rules tighten the fun. But back then, a teenager could light the sky with $10 and a lighter. Neighborhood construction sites became playgrounds once workers left. Kids climbed ladders, balanced on beams, and explored half-built houses like fortresses. Nails, rebar, and open pits didn't scare anyone. It was adventure. Today, fences and cameras keep kids out. But in the 80s, construction zones doubled as after-school entertainment. Dangerous as it sounds now. Kids often stood on seats up front, leaning on dashboards just to see better. Parents thought little of it. Cars moved slower and rules were looser. No booster seats, no airbags, just a kid perched proudly in the front. Today, it sounds like reckless endangerment. But back then, it was common enough to go unnoticed. Drainage ditches and culverts turned into secret forts after storms. Kids crawled through pipes, splashed in runoff, and built hideouts in muddy corners. Parents didn't worry much, and warnings were scarce. Today, the hazards would shut everything down. But back then, it was just part of outdoor imagination, finding adventure in the least expected places. Greasy rags soaked with gasoline cleaned oil from hands. Then kids grabbed lunch without gloves or second thoughts. The sting and smell were familiar, part of working on bikes or lawn mowers. Today, warnings about toxins and safety gear dominate. But back then, a splash of gas was just another tool in the shed. Carb cleaner, brake cleaner, and other harsh solvents were sprayed bare-handed, the mist clinging to skin and clothes. Some joked it doubled as cologne. Safety glasses and gloves were rare, and ventilation wasn't a concern. Today, regulations and warnings make that seem reckless. But in the 80s, it was just how things got cleaned. Paintbrushes went into gasoline for cleaning instead of pricier mineral spirits. It was cheap, fast, and smelly, but nobody minded. Garage cans filled with toxic mixes and fumes clung to the air. Today, disposal sites and warnings loom over every can, but back then, gas handled everything from grease to paint. School buses rolled with windows cranked down, kids bouncing in aisles, shouting and swapping seats. No belts, no cameras, just controlled chaos under a driver's glare. Sometimes kids leaned dangerously out the windows, hair whipping in the wind. Today, the rules are strict, but in the 80s, it was noisy freedom twice a day. Open campus lunches let teens drive off in rusty Novas or Camaros, grabbing burgers or pizza before drifting back late. Schools trusted kids to return, and most did, though not always on time. Today, closed campuses keep students locked in. But back then, a set of keys meant independence and greasy lunches outside school walls. Seatbelt buzzers were quickly silenced with little clips or dangling buckles. The dashboard blinked, but people shrugged. Belts were optional in the minds of many, and cars let you cheat easily. Today, alarms won't quit until everyone's strapped in, but back then, the choice often leaned toward comfort over safety. Coaches pushed kids until they puked, calling it building character, running laps in August heat, doing push-ups until arms gave out. It was framed as toughness training. Parents rarely objected, and kids often laughed it off. Today, sports medicine and liability would step in. But in the 80s, that hard-nosed approach was tradition. Family cars carried dogs loose in the back seat or pacing up front, tongues out the window. No harnesses, no crates, just the family pet, bouncing around happily. Hours passed that way on road trips, and nobody thought twice. Today, safety experts warn otherwise, but in the 80s, dogs rode free, just another passenger.